finest monument of the whole race was the work of its Irish branch. These had brought with them a cargo of immense, long-shaped African stones, which they stood upright in a circle on a hill in County Kildare. The stones had healing properties. A giant who felt sick was placed in a bath below the stone, appropriate to the ailment, and water was poured over it, running down into the bath. The stone's magical virtue, plus herbal infusions, often effected a cure. When the giants were extinct, ordinary-sized Irish called the structure the Giant's Round Dance or Ring, a name preserved in Latin as Chorea Giganticum. They treated the stones with religious reverence. The ring stood on its hill until the 5th century AD, when the enchanter Merlin moved it to Britain and planted it on Salisbury Plain to mark the grave of some British nobles who had been massacred by Saxons. Later again, it received a new name in English, by which it is known to this day: Stonehenge. According to the best report, Merlin used his arts only to dismantle the circle and re-erect it. The stones were conveyed from Ireland to Britain by ship, but some who prefer a more spectacular tale assert that he employed the devil. At that time, the land in Ireland where the ring stood belonged to an old woman who had enclosed it as part of her extensive garden. The devil visited her in the guise of a gentleman and poured out a heap of coins of strange denominations: 4.5 pence, 9 pence, 13 pence. He told her that he wanted the stones, and she could have as much money as she could count while he removed them. She agreed, assuming that the operation would take a long time and she would do well out of it. However, he quickly bound the stones in a willow withy and flew to Salisbury Plain, delivering the bundle to Merlin complete, except for a small one which had worked loose and fallen in the Avon near Bulford. To judge from the map, the devil must have been circling to land. So, here is a picture of Stonehenge on this side, and it is sunset. Many, however, have dismissed Merlin and attributed Stonehenge to the Druids, the priesthood recorded among the Britons by Caesar and others, with their occult powers, their wild sanctuaries and sacred groves, their rumoured human sacrifices. A stone that lies on the ground inside the ring is, they contend, a druidic altar. There are those who claim that the Greeks demonstrably knew of Stonehenge at the time when the Druids flourished. They cite Hegatius of Abdera in the 4th century BC. He writes of a large island north of Gaul, inhabited by a nation whom he calls Hyperboreans. Their chief god is Apollo, and every 19 years, when the heavens are in a certain position, the god visits the island and plays on a harp, an instrument popular with his worshippers. They have a city sacred to him and a remarkable round temple. Britain, Stonehenge. It is said that the stones cannot be counted. Stonehenge is a composite created in stages over a long period. Its English name is related to the Anglo-Saxon word hengen, which meant hanging or gibbet. The reference is to the cross pieces on top of the larger uprights, either because these stones were hung there or because, with the uprights, they give the impression of a group of colossal gibbets. Much of the monument has gone, but the essential plan remains. Sited in a part of Britain that was once populous and advanced, as shown by barrows, artifacts and other evidence, it began as a circular enclosure about 300 feet across. The boundary was a bank of chalk rubble which is still there, though lower than it once was. This enclosure, in archaeologists' parlance, was Stonehenge 1. After a lengthy interval, a double ring of standing blue stones was arranged within it, constituting Stonehenge 2. Next, probably not long after, this was dismantled and replaced by the huge system of uprights and cross pieces, Stonehenge 3A. Lastly, some of the discarded blue stones were set up again inside in two phases, labelled 3B and 3C. The altar stone may be a fallen pillar. The big stones weigh 25 to 50 tons and are known as sarsens, a word derived cryptically from Saracen. They are blocks of natural sandstone, extremely hard, quarried 20 miles away on the Marlborough Downs and transported on rollers. They were artificially smoothed and shaped, a very slow, laborious process with the stone tools available. The cross pieces or lintels, which weigh about 7 tons, have sockets on the underside fitting onto knobs on top of the uprights. So striking is the architectural effect, unparalleled in the megalithic world, that it has prompted suggestions of outside influence. For some years, Stonehenge 3A was dated 1600 to 1500 BC, allowing the conjecture that it was designed by someone familiar with Mycenae in Greece, where very large stones were used in sophisticated buildings. However, a revision of carbon datings by Colin Renfrew pushed it back several centuries. The main phase of construction, producing 2 and 3A, is now thought to lie between 2150 and 2000 BC, i.e. before Mycenae. Since it does not look residential, Stonehenge has usually been explained either as a memorial over a burial site, Geoffrey of Monmouth's idea in the Merlin story, or as a temple of Neolithic religion, while the second view has prevailed. Direct evidence is scanty. There are no grounds for the name given to the altar stone. Just inside the bank, forming the perimeter, are 56 pits called Aubrey holes, after John Aubrey, who discovered them in the 17th century. Some, when excavated, were found to contain cremated human bones, but it cannot be inferred that these were remains of sacrifices. Stonehenge 2 and 3 seem to be orientated towards the place where the sun rises at the summer solstice. For practical purposes, that is all. So this picture is an illustration of Merlin setting up the stones in an illustration to a French version Merlinus was a musician. An altar at Hexham equates him with Apollo the harper, and the harp playing of Hecatius's Apollo indicates that the god he is thinking of may be Maponus, for whose cult, however, there is no evidence at or near Stonehenge. A worse obstacle is that the word here translated round, spheroides, means spherical, not circular, in two dimensions. Since the Britons did not have the technology for a spherical building, the temple must, on the face of it, be fictitious. The only way to give it even a potential reality would be to find another word that might have become spherides through textual corruption. A credible candidate is spiroides. In Greek, the difference is of two letters only. It means spiral and could suggest a ritual labyrinth. In one or two places, Apollo is associated with such a labyrinth, and its pattern occurs in Britain as a rock carving and a turf maze. But even if this idea were accepted, a spiral sanctuary could not be Stonehenge. The Merlin story as told by Geoffrey, its satanic variant is due to John Wood in the 18th century, is more fantastic than the Druidic theory, yet oddly more interesting. While Merlin's Floruit is obviously too late, the previous pseudo-history of the stones and giants shows a vague awareness of megalithic fact, Britain's reputed primeval style. Merdin's precinct may point to some god or demigod in remote antiquity, retrospectively named by the Welsh. Such a being might have been Stonehenge's mythical builder, and the feat might have been ascribed to the enchanter, because, doubtless for a magical or religious reason, he bore the same name. He is Merdyd in Welsh. The literary form Merlin is an adaptation. This too would be merely a fancy if it were not that the Merlin episode apparently preserves factual tradition, not only about the spread of megaliths, but specifically about Stonehenge. Geoffrey portrays the stones as being brought by sea from the west. Wildly improbable as his story sounds, the blue stones did at least travel from the west. Geology discloses a region of origin in the Preseli Mountains in Dyfed. They could have been transported up the Bristol Channel on rafts, and then perhaps up the Bristol Avon. This explanation has been disputed, but is upheld by Renfrew and other authorities. For some reason, the Preseli area was sacred, and stones from there embodied a vital magic. The altar stone is likewise from Wales, probably from near Milford Haven. On past assumptions about the Celtic Britons, implying displacements of population and cultural breaks, it might sound unlikely that a tradition could have been handed down so long to resurface in Geoffrey's book 3,000 years later. But as remarked, there was probably much more continuity than past prehistorians would have allowed. Stonehenge's specific purpose must be acknowledged as still obscure. The implication of sun worship raises the issue of a cult or other celestial bodies, but Gerald Hawkins' view that the entire structure is a kind of computer for predicting such phenomena as eclipses stretches the conception so far that it has failed to convince. The enthusiasms of so-called hippies as exhibited during the 1980s still says nothing about what happened there. The legend that the stones could not be counted is part of the general sense of mystery. Sir Philip Sidney mentions it in a poem. The diarist John Evelyn and Jonathan Swift both tried with different results. Defoe tells of a baker who arrived with a cartload of loaves and placed a loaf on each stone as he counted it. Alas, he was a meticulous man and checked his figure by making the count again and again, and each attempt contradicted the last. H.G. Wells glances at the impossibility in a short story, The Door in the Wall. Most of the early would-be reckoners ended up with a figure in the low 90s. They were not far out, and the discrepancies were due chiefly to uncertainty over what to count as a stone. Stonehenge, druidically viewed, plays a conspicuous role in the imaginings of William Blake. Thomas Hardy and other authors have touched on it. Byron in Don Juan is the most succinct and as much to the point as any of them. The Druids' groves are gone, so much the better. Stonehenge is not, but what the devil is it? I enjoyed that. Hope you did too. So, next time we'll have a look at another chapter. So we've got the maze, the Temple of the Stars, Hillside figures, the Roman era, the Druids, the god over the water, and the Royal Welsh, Mole Mutins and Marcia. Don't know what that is. The end of Brutus's line, King Lear, lots and lots, Merlin, the coming of the Saxons, Saint Ursula and the 11,000 Virgins, Excursus 3, the Western Paradise, Taliesin, the Arthurian landscape, Arthur's Destiny. So is anything that This was the Order of Druids, an elite body with wide-ranging functions. Druids were priests and magicians, seers and poets, judges and doctors. They advised rulers and could exert control over them, even stopping into tribal battles. Their order was not a separate priesthood, but a kind of caste. Druids had wives and children. Women as well as men could belong, though not with equal status. The dominant male element was recruited from society's highest ranks. Membership conferred exemption from service in war, but was not an easy option. The recruit underwent a novitiate of 20 years, spent in sacred caves and wild forest sanctuaries, learning immense amounts of oral law, for the Druids committed little or nothing to writing. Much of this law took the form of verse, charms, riddles, incantations, mythical narratives. Much of it was concerned with cosmology. The Druidic world was a flux, kept in motion by the strife of a fire principle and a water principle. It could be interrupted to some extent by astrology. There was a complex hierarchy of gods, and only the Druids, through contact and communion, knew fully who they were and how to come to terms with them. For human beings, the Druids taught, death was not the end. Souls transmigrated to new bodies. Druids officiated at rituals of many kinds, magical and religious, with no sharp distinction. Ritual indeed pervaded most of their activities. Thus, they practiced herbal healing, but the herb was less important than the procedure. One variety had to be gathered, plucked, not cut, at an auspicious hour by a practitioner dressed in white with bare feet. Another had to be gathered left-handed and fasting. Druids' counsel was apt to be given by inspired divination. They dealt with the gods through various forms of sacrifice. One famous ceremony involved mistletoe. When it grew on an oak tree, a rare occurrence, worshippers gathered on the 6th day of the moon, and a druid in a white robe cut a sprig off the parasite with a golden sickle. He then sacrificed 2 white bulls, and the assembly feasted. Repeatedly, all this had a sinister side. To propitiate their gods, the Druids sacrificed human beings as well as animals. This custom incurred the enmity of the Romans, who gradually abolished it as their power spread. The Druids opposed them in Gaul and later in Britain, but Rome was too strong. The outer world was at last breaking in. As remarked, many have supposed that Stonehenge is a Druid temple. That is why one of its stones, which lies flat sites deemed to be druidic, including a dawn gathering at Stonehenge, marking the summer solstice. Now this picture up here is the Gundestrup cauldron found in Denmark, perhaps a gift from a Celtic thief to a Danish one. It shows druidic figures with human sacrifice. In spite of a large literature on the Druids, not much is known about them. There are no extant documents in which they speak for themselves. Though a Celtic phenomenon, they seem to have been rooted in a deeper antiquity. Some of the clues are curious. An Irish legend tells of a druid named Mog Ruith, dressing up in a bird costume, apparently worn over an inner garment of bull's hide. Having assembled some further druidic equipment, he rises into the air. This is one of a number of hints pointing to Asian shamanism as a remote source, Druidism being a Western outgrowth, carried to a higher degree of sophistication. The Druid's ancestor was perhaps the medicine man, dancing and drumming in ritual gear, conversing with spirits, wielding influence through oracular utterances and a rapport with the powers of nature. While the etymology is disputed, Druid may mean oak knower and refer to a secret lore of trees. In the last centuries BC, the Druids certainly existed as an intertribal order, more prominent in Gaul than in Britain. Though their power has been exaggerated, they had most of the functions traditionally ascribed to them: magical, priestly, poetic, judicial, mediumistic, and their training involved a long course of study. But study of what? One of the few things which can be said with confidence is that some of the subject matter was astronomical and had to do with the calendar. Druids harmonised the solar and lunar years by means of a 19-year cycle, which was known also in Greece as the cycle of Meton. Its druidic version is attested by that passage of Vegetius, construed wrongly as referring to Stonehenge, and by an inscribed plate called the Colony Calendar, found near Bourg-en-Bresse in the French department of Ain. Vegetius, by the way, says that in Britain you can observe the moon much closer and see mountains on it. Perhaps, who knows, the Druids invented telescopes. It is Julius Caesar who records that Druidism was systematized among the Britons, and that its advanced colleges were on the island. The historian Tacitus confirms that the order included women, or at least that they figured in its magical workings. He describes what the Romans saw on the far side of the Menai Strait when they prepared to invade Anglesey, where the Druids were strong. Drawn up on the seashore was a dense mass of armed warriors. Among them, bearing flaming torches, ran ancestral to Druidism, but such a link is conjectural, and so is the plea that while the Druids did not build Stonehenge, they may have used it. Stockley also gave the first major impulse to the theory that the Druids were proto-Christians, associates of Abraham in the patriarchal faith, and believers in a divine trinity. The number 3 was conspicuous in Celtic thinking. It survived notably in Welsh summaries of bardic tradition known as triads, but the theological leap was unjustified. Speculation, nevertheless, grew more flamboyant. Edward Davis, in Celtic Researches 1804, constructed a new model of prehistory. Just after the flood, the families of the world were united. The Druids propagated a pre-deluge curriculum which included writing and other arts. They also tried to keep society peaceful. Violence broke it up, and the Druids, in their British headquarters, deteriorated. But some of their wisdom survived, and not only among the Celts. It created the religions and philosophies of the Greeks and Hindus. Others of the Davis school took the risky step of adding the Hebrews, or at any rate, claiming that scriptural and druidic teachings were identical if you went back far enough. So this picture is a romanticised scene of the advent of Christianity in Britain, with the Druid still performing his oak tree ceremony, but presumably on the brink of eclipse. William Blake carried these notions to their apogee and used them in his poetic mythology. For Blake, all things begin and end in Albion's ancient Druid rocky shore. Before the flood, before the entire biblical history, Albion's sages taught the whole earth, and all the world was of one language and one religion. Atlantis joined Europe to America. Adam was a Druid, and Noah, also Abraham, was called to succeed through Druidical age. The primordial sages betrayed their trust and degenerated into the Druids of history, setting up monstrous temples, Stonehenge for instance, and practicing human sacrifice. Disasters such as the flood swept over the world, and Atlantis vanished beneath the sea, so that the nations were divided. Yet all this was not lost. The original glory can be reinstated. The Golden Age can return. A reconstruction of Druidism by another poet with more claim to a scholarly basis is in Robert Graves' Claudius the God. Cultural neo-Druidism in Wales at the Eisteddfod is something else again. The Welsh bardic tradition, which did derive tenuously from the Druids, survived through the Middle Ages and after, and Eisteddfod was a session at which musicians and poets competed. In 1792, some Welsh bards in London assembled on Primrose Hill and set up a ring of stones surrounding an altar, called the Gorsedd, with a sword on it. They were following the precepts of an imaginative stonemason, Edward Williams, who had assumed the nom de plume Iolo Morganwg and forged a mass of old Welsh literature that has sown confusion ever since. His ceremony was built into a Carmarthen Eisteddfod description is the brief Irish one of Mark Ruth's attire, and that suggests a shamanic outfit which neo-druids might be reluctant to imitate. Hope you enjoyed that. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers saying I shall see you very, very soon. Bye bye for now. Bye bye. Hello everybody. This is Kate at the Library of Whispers. And today we're going to take another look at this lovely book, Mythology of the British Isles. It's by Jeffrey Ash. Last time we looked at the stories, the mythology around Stonehenge. This time I'm going to continue with stories about other standing stones. It's also coffee time, as you can see, so I thought we would do a combination, coffee time and reading. Lovely. Okay, I've put a marker in the page. So this was the Stonehenge chapter under Mysteries of Early Britain. If you missed it, I'll pop a link in the description. So we're going to continue with Avebury and Silbury. Let me just move my coffee slightly out the way. I'm going to have another sip first. Let's begin. Avebury, west of Marlborough, is one of a cluster of major prehistoric works. It is a more or less circular enclosure, 1,400 feet across, with arrangements of standing stones inside. Other stones in rows form an avenue leading away from it to a smaller site called the Sanctuary. Not far off, to the south, is Silbury, an artificial hill, 130 feet high, flat-topped, with a moat. Beyond that is West Kennet, Longbarrow, a mound 350 feet in length, with a stone-lined burial chamber. The plan of Avebury, plus some of the outlying features, has been explained as representing a partly coiled snake. Silbury is the reputed burial mound of King Sil, otherwise unknown, or of a knight in golden armour. It may even conceal a solid gold statue of a horse and its rider, or it may be a load of earth which the devil meant to drop from the air on Marlborough, but had to let go, thanks to the prayers of priests at Avebury. More attractive, perhaps, is the view that these places are interrelated sacred sites, all concerned with the worship of the earth goddess. Now there's an illustration down here. This says Stockley's diagram of his serpent theory connecting Avebury, the Avenue and Silbury. Saracens all around the perimeter. These were not dressed to shape, as in Stonehenge. Fewer than half of them remain. What is left may suggest an octagon rather than a circle. The largest of the survivors weigh at least 40 tons. The rest were broken up and removed long ago, partly for use as building material, partly to clear the ground for cultivation. Dislike on the part of the Christian clergy doubtless encouraged this process. About 1320, a man who was helping to smash one of the stones was crushed to death when it keeled over on top of him. In 1938, his skeleton was found with tools of his trade. He was a barber surgeon. Two smaller circles formerly stood near the centre of the enclosure. These also are much depleted, one of them almost to nothing. Now this photograph shows Silbury seen across the water near its foot. Avebury's order of construction was the reverse of Stonehenge's. It proceeded from the centre outwards. The circles in the middle came first, the outer ring or octagon later, together with the ditch and bank. The lines of stones constituting the avenue began near the south entrance and ended over a mile away at the sanctuary, which then had another ring. As at Stonehenge, the main structure can hardly be anything but a temple, and as at Stonehenge, its nature is obscure. Even astronomical clues are lacking. A past guess at serpent worship had no basis but the fancy that the Avebury Avenue sanctuary formation was serpentine. Let's have a bit more coffee. Druids were devotees of a great goddess, or rather the great goddess, on many grounds. Besides, this has been contended that divinity was once female, or predominantly so, and the rise of male gods was a major change, perhaps due to a shift in the sex's relative importance. Robert Graves and others have claimed that numerous Greek myths are recasting of older ones with a goddess orientation. In the interests of a male-governed Olympus, Britain has less literary matter to subject to this kind of analysis. However, when its pre-Christian cults emerge into view, female elements are certainly conspicuous. Archaeology supplies evidence for a triple goddess and other figures, and several heroines of Welsh legend are Celtic deities humanised. When the British Apollo, Maponus, becomes the Welsh character Mabon, he has a mother, Modron, who is ultimately the river goddess, Matrona. Modron, in her turn, may well be original of the enchantress Morgan Le Fay, in whose Isle of Avalon female power presides. Many feminists regard all goddesses as aspects of one great goddess. As a step in a restoration, some have adopted Dame's theory, at least to the extent of revering Silbury as hers. Okay, so I'm going to read the next chapter, which is called Great Stones in General. But first, coffee. This is a decaf coffee with oat milk, by the way. It's my new favourite. Well, not so new actually. I've been having it for a while now. Okay, let's carry on. Megalithic circles and cromlechs are found in many parts of Britain. The latter are formed by a large stone resting on top of smaller ones, giving the impression of a very rough table. In Cornwall, some are said to have treasure buried beneath them. These are protected by the ghosts of the giants still lurking unseen in their ancient country, under the name of Spriggans. Other cromlechs are credited with other functions. Kit's Coty House in Kent is the tomb of a British chief, Catigern, who fell fighting Saxons at nearby Aylesford in the 5th century AD. Wayland's Smithy, on the Ridgeway, formerly in Berkshire, now in Oxfordshire, houses an invisible, living occupant. If a traveller with a horse that has lost a shoe leaves it at this place with a coin and returns after a reasonable time, Wayland will have shod the horse and the money will be gone. So this image here is Wayland's Smithy. The stories of several circles are alleged, like those of Stonehenge, to be impossible to count. The Merry Maidens at St. Berrien in Cornwall can be counted In most places, the mythology of the megaliths does not reach so far back. Structures such as Kit's Coty House and Wayland's Smithy are burial chambers, formerly under mounds that have disappeared, and sometimes they are known to be such, but they are Neolithic, and their supposed occupants are later, like Categoan. Wayland is a Saxon character, the same person as Volunda, a wonder-working smith of Norse myth who is captured by a king, lamed to prevent him from escaping and forced to work. Now, this is an illustration of Wayland at work. It's an illustration to Kipling's Book of Book Hill. He avenges himself on the king's family and uses his magic to fly away. Wayland's connection with the burial chamber is on record as early as the 9th century. The craft of the smith is often associated with magic, and very widely, according to a Siberian proverb. The blacksmith and the shaman are of one nest. Various Germanic legends introduces craftsmen dwelling in caves or hollow hills, and Wayland or Volunda may have been domiciled in the burial chamber for that reason. It is interesting, however, that Volunda is also connected with labyrinths, perhaps because his airborne escape recalls Daedalus from Crete. An Icelandic manuscript has a picture of the Cretan labyrinth with the caption, Volunda's house, that is the house of Daedalus. Wayland is mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon epic Beowulf, and in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Latin poem, The Life of Merlin. Sir Walter Scott brings him into Kenilworth as a human being, Kipling into Book of Books Hill as a dethroned god. With all the stone circles, or rather, as a rule, ellipses, there is the same doubt about the purpose as there is with Stonehenge, and folklore expresses the same feeling of uncanniness. That shows in the difficulty of counting them, and in other ways, as with the storms at Long Meg and Stanton Drew. Christianity contributes the notion of the stones being sinners, transformed by a curse or divine judgment. The petrification of Long Meg and her daughters is like the change of the witch of Wookey Hole into a stalagmite. Female bones and accompanying relics found in the Somerset Cavern in 1912 suggested that its witch existed, but there is no similar evidence for Long Meg. The motif of revellers turned to stone for Sabbath breaking is medieval and, of course, Christian, leaving the older world behind. A more modern opinion is that some of the circles were observatories used for tracking the moon and other bodies. The pioneer of the megalithic observatory was Alexander Thorne, who propounded the idea on the basis of such painstaking study and measurement. Arrangements of stones and lines of sighting along them are said to correspond to celestial movement. Professor Tom's work has gained some acceptance by archaeologists, but only as applying to certain sites, not as an all-purpose explanation. So I think next we'll have a look at hillside figures. Now what do I mean by that? Let me see if I can find you a picture. So we've got two pictures of hillside figures. This is an aerial view of the Uffington White Horse, which is the oldest surviving hillside figure. So, figures carved into the hillside. The Jog Heel such images exist. Horses compose the largest group. There are also human figures, crosses, and military insignia. Very few have any serious claim to antiquity or mystery, but 3 or 4 have. Most famous of them all is the White Horse at Uffington, high up by the Ridgeway, east of Swindon. The Vale of White Horse takes its name from this figure, which can be seen from more than 15 miles off, and is seen best from a distance, though not from as far away as that. Unlike the rest, this is non-realistic, being traced with a few disjointed lines, a shorthand horse, 370 feet long. Tradition attributes it to Alfred the Great. He was born at nearby Wantage, and on this view had the figure cut to commemorate a victory over the Danes at Ashdown in 871. But stranger tales are told. Below is Dragon Hill, small with a bare flat top. Here St. George slew and buried the dragon. Its blood made the hilltop sterile, and the figure portrays the saint's horse. Or perhaps it is not a horse at all, but the dragon in person. However, it has been on record as a horse for more than 800 years. The local lord of the manor formerly had to ensure that it was cleared of grass and weeds every 7 years, and the ritual scouring enlisted the populace. It was a kind of fair with feasting, sports, and general jollification at the lord's expense. 5 miles from Westbury in Wiltshire, on the face of the Bratton Downs, is another well-known horse. This one is a solid figure, 166 feet long, and realistic. Alfred has been mentioned here too. In Dorset, just northwest of Cerne Abbas, is the Cerne Giant, an outlined male nude, frontal, though the feet are turned in semi-profile. The giant is 180 feet tall, with slightly bent knees, suggesting that he is walking rather than standing still. Inside the outline are a face, nipples, ribs, and a huge erect penis pointing upwards, with testicles below. In his raised right hand, the giant brandishes a club, 120 feet long, executed with care. Legend tells of a real giant, a Danish one, who terrorised the district till he ate a number of sheep in Blackmoor and lay down on the hillside to sleep. The peasants beheaded him and cut the outline around the body as a warning to other giants. It used to be rumoured that the figure itself had life in it. Sometimes the giant would detach himself from the hill and drink at a stream below, or, more alarmingly, devour a village maiden. It was believed also that if a girl slept on the figure, she would bear many children, and that a barren woman could be cured by having sexual relations on it. Well into the 19th century, maypole dancing took place in the neighbouring earthworks called the Trendle or the Frying Pan. Courting couples are still said to visit the giant at night. A scouring ceremony was formerly held every 7 years, as with the Uffington horse. But a figure put a stop to it because these gatherings tended to practical illustrations of the folk beliefs. On the north face of Windover Hill in Sussex is the Long Man of Wilmington, also known as the Lanky Man and the Lone Man. He is frontal like the Cerne Giant, again in outline, but in this case there are no visible features inside. The figure is a silhouette about 230 feet tall. For many years this was the world's largest representation of a human being. eyes, and he holds two staffs in a vertical position, one in his right hand, one in his left. They are slightly longer than himself. In 1874, when grass had nearly effaced him, the Duke of Devonshire paid for the outline to be made permanent with whitewashed bricks. Faint traces of eyes, nose and mouth were not marked. Let me see if we have a picture of him. No, I don't think we do. Welsh legend, as will be told in its place. Wayland's smithy is only half a mile or so off, and there are other hints at sacredness in this piece of country. Thomas Hughes described the region ritual cleansing in his novel The Scouring of the White Horse. The Westbury figure is not ancient, but there is testimony to an earlier horse, if perhaps not much earlier. The historic exploit supposedly recalled is Alfred's victory over the Danes in 878, won at Ethandune, probably the nearby village of Eddington. The notion seems to be quite unfounded. Francis Wise, author of the first printed account of this horse in 1742, heard that it had been cut within living memory. Gough, an editor of William Camden's Britannia, thought Wise had been misinformed and held to the Saxon theory. He surveyed the figure in 1772 and published a picture. If this is accurate, the horse was a grotesque creature, facing right and more like a dachshund. It may have been a comparatively recent fake, a bad imitation of the Uffington horse. Anyhow, it is no longer there. In 1778, Lord Abington's steward decided to replace it by a great deal of turfing and recutting. He blotted it out and created the present horse, facing left. The Cerne figure is first mentioned in 1751, but its artistic style and its blatantly phallic nature do not suggest a date anywhere near that. The popular legends have an air of antiquity. Thomas Hardy mentions the rustic belief in the giant's cannibalism. In 1872, an archaeologist, W.A. Black, proposed a Roman date and may well have been right. Unfortunately, he grounded his case on very far-fetched arguments. He claimed that the figure marked a point used by Roman surveyors, and that lines could be drawn relating it to known Roman sites. Also, that some of the more mentionable dimensions, such as the giant's height and the length of his club, recorded key distances. Black's fancies foreshadowed a type of thinking that has come to the fore in more recent speculations concerning lays and sacred geometry. Okay, I'm just going to have a bit more coffee. Yet attempts to maintain the alternative of a dark age or medieval date have been ineffectual. They depended on guesswork about the monastery at Cerne. There is a record of monks in 1268, though not here, making an image of the fertility god Priapus to calm peasants worried about diseased cattle. Presumably those at Cerne might have done something similar. It is unlikely, however, that any monks would have been allowed to complete such a huge, prolonged, and scandalous work as drawing the giant on the hillside, whether as an essay in magic or as a joke. Legends of Cerne Abbey's foundation emphasise stubborn local paganism, centering on a god called Helith, Helis, or Hyle. St. Augustine, on a fictitious mission to Dorset, is said to have smashed Helith's idol and founded the abbey on the site. Explicit equations of the god with the giant are speculative, but the evidence for a strong pagan cult before the local Christianization is good enough to carry some weight. It may have been strong enough to persist afterwards beneath century AD. British worship of this club-wielding deity, or a god likened to him, is proved by various remains, such as an altar at Whitley Castle and a sculpture at Corbridge, the latter portraying him nude with upraised club in a pose like the giants. The name Helith is related to others that may derive from a corruption of Hercules. The Long Man of Wilmington is very puzzling indeed, partly because he has only looked as he does now since his reconstruction in 1874. His two staffs may once have been more complicated, may even have been implements. In a sketch dating from 1779, the year of his documentary debut, they are a rake and a scythe. Guessworkers put him in several periods and identified him with a medley of characters: Balder, Beowulf, Woden, Thor, Apollo, Mercury, even the Hindu god Varuna, even Saint Paul and Mohammed. Thor has more to be said for him than the rest, but only a little more. Again, the Long Man may be a memorial of some chief, dimly recalled as the slain giant on the hilltop. He may be a prehistoric surveyor, or dodman, or a Roman soldier, or the military badge of King Harold, or a pilgrim drawing attention to the whereabouts of Wilmington Priory. If the last, he dates from before 1414, when the priory was dissolved. On the basis of place name etymology and a Saxon artifact, a case has been made for Wendell, a mythical warrior, possibly a war god. Other attested giants are gone forever. One on Plymouth Hoe, already noted, was called Gog Magog, and was said to mark the site of that monster's wrestling bout with Coroneus. The figure is first mentioned in 1486. Plymouth Corporation's audit book lists payments at intervals for Gog Magogs, making clean or new cutting. In 1602, there were apparently two figures distinguished as Gog and Magog. Though one writer calls them Gog Magog and Coroneus, neither survived beyond the reign of Charles II. Oh, okay, so look, this is the Long Man of Wilmington. You can see him here with his two staffs. A figure at the earthwork fort, Wandlebury Camp near Cambridge, is mentioned early in the 17th century. At that time the students called these hills the Gog Magog Hills. The giant could still be seen in 1724, and the student's name for the hills has remained to this day, but the giant has not. Quite possibly he was cut by the students themselves. Wandlebury, however, sounds like Wendell at Wilmington, and there may have been some pre-Christian exist worldwide, and indigenous cultures developed their own interpretations of how the landscape and its features came into being. In British folklore, an ancient race of giants formed the landscape before the advent of human beings. These representations of the primal forces of nature could be seen to embody the glaciers and floods that gouged out valleys and deposited huge boulders, earthquakes that raised and shook the land, and winds and erosion that created all the diverse forms in the landscape. Giants. Before the arrival of the first human settlers, the island of Britain was inhabited by a race of legendary giants, thought to have been quite dim-witted. These giants liked to show off their strength by hurling rocks around, and in the process they created many of the landscape features that we see today. Songlines or mythic roots. The term songlines refers to the ancient sacred pathways that crisscross Australia. They came into being in the dream time when the ancestral spirits of indigenous Australians created life and formed the landscape. The course of these tracks, taken in landscape features and sacred locations, was passed down in songs and stories that served to reinforce cultural bonds and function as navigational and teaching aids. The ancient Britons also had stories that linked several locations, such as the hunt for the giant boar and his piglets. The pursuit took King Arthur and his men across the landscape of South Wales, stopping at many significant landscape features along the way. Mother Goddess. Female figurines found all over Europe from the Mesolithic period onwards are evidence of the most ancient religion in Europe, the cult of the Mother Goddess. To the ancient Celts, the Mother Goddess had many names, such as Anu, Danu or Anis, and the sites of her sacred springs and wells would later become associated with Christian saints, such as Saint Anne. Animate stones. Folk tales concerning stories that stones come to life and move, or people who were turned to stone, forming stone circles and other stone monuments are widespread. In Britain, our tribal ancestors would have viewed at least some stones as living beings or stone people, and folk tales developed from this belief. Portals or entrances to the other world. The other world, a place of magic and the abode of spirits, coexists alongside our mundane world, but at certain locations the boundaries between the two realms were flimsy. Our auspicious nights of the year, such as Beltane and Samhain, fairies ventured forth and might be glimpsed in the twilight. Fairies. The fairies of folklore bear little in common with the cute winged fairies of popular imagination. Devoid of wings, they were represented as tall, shining beings losing side at the Battle of Ardern near Arthurst. Celtic saints and miracles. I think I've missed one out. Yeah. Arthur and other legendary heroes. The ancient cultures of the British Isles each had legendary heroes. The Brythonic Celts had Arthur, the Scots and Gaels had Fingale, and the Anglo-Saxons had Wade and Wayland. Celtic saints and miracles. The period covering the early 5th and 6th centuries after the departure of the Romans from Britain was perhaps the darkest period of Britain's Dark Ages. Few written historical records exist, but what endures are the extraordinary legends of King Arthur and the miraculous tales associated with the early Celtic missionaries, especially St. Columba of is a stack of stepped rocks known as Magi Vicky's chair ladder. Having climbed to the top, a legendary witch of the same name would launch herself into the air on a broomstick fashioned from a stem of ragwort. From her rocky perch, Magi Vicky could also summon up storms that caused ships to be wrecked in Portlow. According to local folklore, a woman's body once washed up there after just such a shipwreck, and Magi, sensing there was something special about this female, buried the corpse at Portlow, then hid the woman's jewels in a chest at her home in nearby Raftra. Afterwards, a strange light would emerge from the grave at night and then pass over the cliffs, settling over the chair ladder before moving on to Maggie's hut and hovering over the chest. 3 months later, a mysterious stranger arrived from abroad, found the grave, and then followed the light in Maggie's hut, where he reclaimed the jewellery and then departed, leaving gifts in return. So down here, this is Menantol Morva. Nestled in a gorse enclosure up on the Penwith Moors, the Hold Stone of Menantol, with a standing stone at either end, has been renowned since ancient times for its magical cures. It was once known locally as the Crick Stone, and according to custom, crawling through the hole naked 3 times against the sun, i.e. anti-clockwise, would cure pains in the neck and back as well as rheumatism. Children were passed through the hole to ensure good health, and the friendly this is Holywell Cave. Holywell. A stunning natural sea cave with a magical secret. Holywell Cave lies at the northern end of the broad sands expanse of Holywell Beach and can only be reached when the tide is out. Venture inside the liminal place and you'll see the most amazing coloured rocks, including stepped bowl formations that fill with crystal clear spring water. The spring is located in a small chamber just above and can be reached by climbing up time-worn steps. From the Christian era, this magical natural spring was known as St. Cuthbert's Well, after Bishop Alden of Lindisfarne was shipwrecked here in 995 AD, carrying the sacred remains of St. Cuthbert. The saint's remains are said to have touched the side of the well, endowing it with miraculous healing properties. Children from the neighbourhood were subsequently immersed in the well water on Holy Thursday to cleanse their bodies of sickness and deformity. The disabled would also travel to the cave and, leaving their crutches behind, were said to crawl up to the spring and to drink the water in the hope of a miraculous cure. Number 10. This is Nine Maidens and St. Breoch Downs, St. Column Major. On the summer of St. Breoch Downs, in a landscape with other Bronze Age monuments, is Cornwall's largest and heaviest standing stone, the 3-metre tall grey shale St. Breoch monolith, with white feldspar veins, also known as Menkirta or the Long Stone. When excavated, it was found to lie on a bed of white quartz crystals, which may have been placed to amplify the powerful energies of the place. The stone sits in the centre of a late Neolithic to mid-Bronze Age cairn monument and was thought to be a meeting place in medieval times. And here we have Menacuttle Well, St. Austell. Tucked away among ornamental gardens on the outskirts of St. Austell, Menacuttle Well sits beside a gently flowing river and tranquil waterfall. The medieval stone well house contains healing water in a deep stone trough, and the water flows freely around the well through shallow stone channels. Sick children and those afflicted with ulcers came here to be cured, and bent pins were thrown into the waters for divination and to bring good fortune. Its name is derived from Menacuttle, which means the hawk stone. The well still retains a magical atmosphere enhanced by the ribbons and crystals hung all around by West Midlands and the Welsh marshes. Let's read the introduction. Characterised by rolling green hills, this region becomes ever more wild and rugged as it needs the Welsh borders. These borderlands encompass a diverse landscape of high as he struck the stone and was killed, although some say the hollows were made by King Arthur himself as he knelt there to pray. According to a curious legend, the stones have dwindled in size over the years and were once so large that 100 sheep could lie in the shadow cast by the monument, and a grown man could stand easily beneath the capstone. Okay, so let's go to this picture. This is number 2. Hetty Beglar's Dump in Ully or Ewley in Gloucestershire. Ewley Long Barrow, also known as Hetty Beglar's Dump, retains a strange, numinous atmosphere nearly 6,000 years after it was first constructed. Situated in a quiet corner of a field, the earth mound backs onto a peaceful area of woodland. The very low entrance requires visitors to crawl through, but once inside, the long, spacious passage gives access to 3 chambers that would have once housed the bones of the dead. Some of the huge blocks of stone that line these chambers are punctuated with natural holes and cavities, which some identify as vulva stones, a memory of the ancient cult of the goddess, where people sometimes leave offsprings of flowers and crystals. Enclosed within the dark, womb-like interior, you can almost feel the imminent presence of the goddess as well as dark ancestral spirits. Now this unusual looking stone is called Longstone at Minchinhampton, Gloucestershire. The deeply weathered and pock-marked limestone monolith, known as the Longstone, was thought to possess the power to heal childhood diseases. It stands over 2 metres tall, with a pitted, lichen-speckled surface, and several natural holes that pierce the body of the stone. Infants with rickets, measles, or whooping cough would be passed through the largest of these holes in hope of a cure. The stone was said to move around the field is number 19. It's called Lud's Church at Orgreave. So this is Staffordshire. Steep stone steps lead down into the chasm known as Lud's Church, a deep and narrow cleft in the landscape that is imbued with legend. The cleft runs for Nature Reserve in the village of Albrighton, the historic St Cuthbert's healing spring flows out into a landscaped pond in a garden-like enclosure surrounded by trees. The waters of the well were said to be beneficial for eye problems and to even cure blindness, although the well in its present form is probably 19th century. The presence of old yew trees nearby suggests the area has a long history as a sacred site. Here we have St Milburgh as well, Stoke St Milburgh. Blowing out from under a stone basin, the gushing waters of St Milburgh as well form a fast flowing rivulet that cascades down a wooden gully. The spring was said to have been formed by the hoof of St Milburgh's white horse striking the ground to provide healing waters to bathe her wounds when she was fleeing from her enemies. She then performed another miracle by causing a field newly sown with barley to become fully grown. When St Milburgh's pursuers reached the spot, they were baffled when told by the local people that she had passed by just after the barley had been sown. In another version of the story, she caused a stream to swell to block her pursuer's path. She later became the protectress of the river Corve, which she miraculously caused to flow. All these stories hint at memories of an ancient fertility and nature goddess who could make crops grow and water flow. In one final twist, the original name of Stoke St Milburgh was Godstock, or Goddess Stoke, Godda being the fairy woman who married wild Edric of Glon. Like the fairy queen of folklore, Goddess Stoke rode around on a white horse, so the story of St Milburgh may be linked to the fairies as well as to goddess worship. So here we have the Wrekin at Little Wenlock, and on the right this is Alderley Edge in Cheshire. The wooded rocky ridge of Alderley Edge is an area steeped in history and legend, bearing the scars of many ancient mines and quarries. It is overgrown with trees and crisscrossed by footpaths. It was in this woodland that a farmer, taking a white mare to sell at market, met an old man with a long beard. The old man asked to buy the horse, but the farmer rudely refused, believing he would get a better price in the market. The old man retorted that although many would admire the horse, no one would buy her that day. This indeed proved true, so the disappointed farmer set off home. Once more, he met the old man at the same spot, who now asked the farmer to follow him to a rock face in the hillside. As the old man touched the rock, it split with a thunderous crack to reveal a magical iron gate that led to a cavern beyond. Within the cavern a host of warriors lay sleeping, all with a white horse beside them except for one. The terrified farmer now gladly accepted the gold coins offered, as the old man explained. The warriors lay sleeping until the hour of a mighty battle, when the fate of England would be decided. As the farmer hastily left, the rock face sealed itself once more, and no one has seen the enchanted cavern since. Controversy, however, dogged the story, and the two photographers, now elderly women, admitted they'd faked them, using drawings stuck on hat pins. However, Frances Griffiths, the younger of the two, maintained until the end of her life that the fifth and final photo, taken in 1920, was not a fake. In this image titled Fairies and Their Sunbath, ethereal fairy women are seen in a nest-like enclosure of grasses and flowers. In addition to fairies and wood elves, the girls also saw little men dressed in green around the waterfall at the beck. Cottingley Beck now flows behind a modern housing estate to the south of the village, and this little patch of wilderness amid the development can only be reached by scrambling down beside a bridge that provides access to the estate. In recognition of the story, some of the estate's roads were named after the fairies in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. The original photographic prints and camera used by the girls are on display in Bradford's National Science and Media Museum. The Yorkshire Dales. So let's see. We have number 7, which is this picture here. Diana's Well at East Witton. Also known as Castaway Well. This natural spring and grotto in private woodland on Witton Fell is said to have an ancient association with the Roman goddess Diana. The water flows from the mouth of an evocative stone-carved head, known affectionately as Slavering Cell, and the attached grotto is of 19th century construction, with mosses and ferns growing on the walls and a small stone tablet and basin of pure spring water. Traditionally, small items would be cast into the water while making a wish, while a local rhyme states, "Whoever eats hammer nuts and drinks Diana's water will never leave Witton Town while he's a rag or tatter." Okay, now number 9 is Bolton Hill in Thresfield. Near the summit of Bolton Hill is a near vertical shaft known as Navy Noodle Hole that leads down to deep underground caverns. It is said to be an entrance to the land of Faerie, whose inhabitants have been seen dancing at night on the grassy flanks of the hill. One man who tried to join the dancing was pushed and jostled. Forced to leave, he grabbed one of the fairies and stashed it in his pocket, but when he looked inside, the fairy had escaped. Another encountered a band of fairies and their queen, describing her voice as like the sound of a silver trumpet. He felt compelled to follow, and the fairies enjoyed leading him astray until he became lost, but later released him from their spell. In the nearby village of Thresfield, the spring-fed pond known as Our Lady's Well is said to offer a refuge from supernatural beings. One night, a man chased by Pam the fiddler and a host of imps leapt into the pool to save himself. Right, let's have a look at this. she spent her days was this dark cave on the banks of the River Nid. In later stories, her appearance was that of a stereotypical witch, with a humped back and hooked nose that nearly reached her chin. A statue of Mother Shipton now stands inside her cave. Next to Mother Shipton's cave is the famous Dropping Well, where mineral-rich water flows over a small cliff to form a curtain of smooth flowstone deposits. Dangling from it are a collection of modern objects that in a matter of weeks appear to turn to stone. Behind this curtain of flowstone there is a cave, and at one end of it clear water flows into a natural basin where people make wishes. On the opposite bank of the river are two of the oldest medieval cave shrines in the country. The first, Sir Robert's Cave, is now dark, empty and abandoned, but served as feast is also the site of magical occurrences. The first concerns the hob of a hot hall, a little fellow, covered in shaggy hair and wearing nothing more than a threadbare tunic, who helped out around the farm at night. When some boys spied on him and, taking pity, made him a new tunic, the hob was insulted and left, never to return. In the second story, a hare was seen by a local farmer nibbling his saplings. Realising it was a witch in disguise, he loaded his gun with silver pellets, then shot and wounded the hare, which took refuge in the cottage of a witch. Awed Maggie. She was found the next day with unexplained wounds. The slopes lays or ill-defines some things which are there anyway, and ancient monuments only draw attention to them. The requirements can be less rigid. The monuments need not be close enough together or visible enough to be usable as landmarks along a route, because they are not. Lay hunters of the lines of force school have spoken of lays crossing the sea with nothing marking them at all, of lays 25 Sarum lay reckoned as 18.5 miles long. Here. So it starts with Frankenbury Camp, Clearbury Ring, Salisbury Cathedral, Old Sarum, Stonehenge, and Tumulus. Okay, let's go on to the next chapter, the Temple of the Stars. There are those who say they can trace the outlines of astrological figures on the face of Somerset. The Glastonbury zodiac, as the system is often called, is formed by features of the landscape and covers a circle 10 miles across. The figures vary in length from a mile to 5 miles. They are in roughly the same relative positions as the constellations are in the sky. Aries, the ram, covers most of Street and the fields between that town and the Bolton Hills. Taurus, the bull, is a horned head only, plus a hoof, and extends along the same line of hills and over an area on the south side. Gemini, the twins, comprise Dundon Hill and its neighbourhood. Cancer, the crab, is not actually a crab, but a ship, partly surrounding Gemini. Leo, the lion, is at the south of the circle, near Somerton. Virgo, the virgin, is round to the southeast, alongside the Fossway. Libra, the scales, is another substituted image like Cancer, being a dove, close to the centre of the system at Barton St. David. Scorpio, the scorpion, straggles over the Fossway, north of Virgo. Sagittarius, the archer, is a huge mounted man around the Pennard Hills. Capricorn, the goat, is a unicorn on the circle's north rim, his single horn being the earthwork of Ponta's bull. Aquarius, the water carrier, is represented by a phoenix, its head a Glastonbury tall. Pisces, the fishes, lies between Glastonbury and Street, one of them being the ridge of Weriol Hill, the other less definite. There is also an extra, a dog outside the circle, stretching from Langport to Athelney. Catherine Maltwood, who discovered the zodiac, called it the Temple of the Stars. She was led to it by clues in a medieval romance. Perlasivus, or the High History of the Holy Grail. Its anonymous author claims to have used to document a Glastonbury Abbey, and his story has episodes located in Somerset. Mrs. Maltwood explained allusions to lions and other unlikely creatures by detecting them as shapes in the landscape. She suggested that the zodiac was the work of Sumerians about 2700 BC. In view of two palpable difficulties, its gigantic size and the fact that many of the features cannot be ancient, later advocates have preferred to invoke terrestrial forces which have moulded the figures and impelled human beings to add to them, unconsciously, in the course of making roads and fixing field boundaries. Believers are agreed that the zodiac is demonstrable because it can be seen from the air, and that it has been of vast importance in myth-making. The mounted archer, for instance, who carries no visible bow or arrows, is the original Arthur, and the circle itself is the original round table. The Glastonbury zodiac is best viewed as another modern myth, like ley lines. One of the major objections its essential pattern is always the same. In Greece it was a symbol for the Cretan labyrinth, and that meaning was known in Pompeii, where it was scratched on a pillar with a caption. The maze is found among the Etruscans and in India once as representing the fortress in Sri Lanka, where Rama's abducted wife Sita was imprisoned. Ireland has an instance of it inscribed on a stone from Hollywood in County Wicklow. In Britain, here, it is carved twice on a rock near Tintagel. However, it is best known among the Welsh. Shepherds used to mark out its complex spiral on the turf as a pastime. In Cumbria and near Bransbury in Yorkshire, it is likewise known as a turf design. Its traditional Welsh name is Caerdroea, meaning the city or fortification of Troy. Allegedly, the maze is a plan of Troy's defences, with 7 walls and a labourer's way through them. Welsh schoolboys used to challenge other schoolboys to draw the walls of Troy correctly. This Troy town motif is repeated in the naming of Scandinavian mazes, which are similar, though not identical. A huge instance in 3 dimensions is believed by many to encircle Glastonbury Tor. All around the hill are terraces of unknown age and purpose. They can be interpreted as the remains of an earthwork system on the same septenary pattern. A maze threader would start from a large stone at the foot of the longer path of ascent, climb the path as far as another stone, turn left and proceed clockwise along the terrace at that level. Now here is the counterpoint argument. The maze is not a myth in the sense of being a fancy or a literary invention. Some of the instances, such as the Cornish ones, are there to be seen, and the maze on the Tor is demonstrably possible, if unproved. The mythic quality is a matter of implication in the light of occurrences outside Britain, and these point in more than one direction. To look first at the Cretan labyrinth, this seems to have begun as a dance rather than a building. A file of dancers performed it on a ritual floor, following the septenary backtracking spiral. Cretan coins reproduce the pattern. According to the Minotaur legend, Theseus put in at the island of Delos on his way home from Crete and instituted a ritual dance there in commemoration, which was still being danced in classical times. Delos was Apollo's birthplace among the Greeks, and the dance circled his altar. The god was involved in other ways, although perhaps not originally. Coins portraying the labyrinth have his profile on the obverse. According to Virgil's Aeneid, the labyrinth was depicted outside the cave of his oracle at Cumac in Italy. The Trojan link is something else. An Etruscan vase and other clues show this to be the very old and not purely British or even northern. Then Aeneid describes the Trojans, supposedly ancestors of the Romans, as performing an equestrian exercise called the Game of Troy, in part of which the riders filed round in interlacing circles, compared by the poet to the Cretan labyrinth. A manoeuvre of the same name was still staged as a cavalry display in Virgil's time and later. As to whether the Welsh Caerdroea owes anything to the Aeneid or to some offshoot of the Brutus legend, documentation is lacking. Far back, the Trojan connection may have arisen from an association of the maze and others somewhat like it This motif gives an added interest to the theory of the Glastonbury maze. An early Arthurian legend tells of Guinevere being carried off by a local king and held by him at Glastonbury, so that Arthur has to come with an army to retrieve her. Archaeology attests buildings on top of the door, at the heart of the proposed maze, in roughly the Arthur period. So here we have a photograph of Glastonbury Tor, and you can just about see the lines of the terraces, which may be the remnants of a prehistoric maze. Attempts have been made to account for the door's terracing in other ways, or at any rate to refute the maze, but they have been inconclusive. While hills elsewhere in Somerset are shelved in some degree, there is no true parallel. The maze explanation was first offered by Geoffrey Russell. It is taken seriously, though, without commitment, by Professor Philip Ratz, who excavated the Tor's summit area during the 1960s. In Ratz's view, the maze, if real, should probably be assigned to the Neolithic era of great ritual works, though it might have continued in use long afterwards. A disproof based on a dubious allusion to the Tor being heavily wooded in the 12th century, in which case the terracing would have to be later and follow a clearance, fails to hold water. Large trees do not grow on the Tor proper, where the terraces are. It is too exposed and the soil is too shallow. Any forest would have been on the lower slopes around it. The chief rival explanation that the terraces are agricultural strip lynchets is rendered unlikely by several factors, one of them being a sharp downward bend or kink in the system, affecting certain joins that would be required for the maze, but not for lynchets, or indeed for anything else that has been suggested. Unlike the Glastonbury zodiac, the Tor maze theory does not depend on arbitrary constructions or selectivity. The entire pattern is present except in steep places where weathering or erosion would obviously have wiped it out, and with minor and explicable exceptions, it uses all the terraces. If the apparent track is followed, it makes the 7 circuits. The only query arises from the last, which is not quite completed on the surface. Conjecturally, the maze threading ended with entry into a tunnel leading to an underground chamber, an idea favoured by persistent local law about the Tor being hollow. While the purpose of the Tor maze, if it exists, can only be guessed at by analogy with other cases, it would amount to a strong argument for a pre-Christian sanctuary. Theological feminists who claim such sites as Avebury and Silbury for the goddess have also claimed the Tor. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you enjoyed that. Next time we might look at dynasties, the next section. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers saying I shall see